Hello everyone, so this is Volshock. We're going to be doing a replay review for Plazma, who is the purple player on the blue team, who is in the bottom right, and this is Salt Reef, I think 0.9 or 0.1. So Salt Reef is an 8x8 map. It's traditionally played as a 6-2, meaning that there's the 6 front, and then you'll normally have 2 backline players, one who techs and one who goes air. I've actually seen the tech and the air position kind of vary among these 3 back here. Sometimes this person will go air, sometimes this person, sometimes this person. I think it's really just kind of dependent on what players feel comfortable teching. But Plazma is on the bottom here, and so his lane is going to be against Snidjock or Pink over here. So, or I guess magenta over here. So this is his lane, and let's see what is going on. All right, so we are gonna go max. Looks like wind max. What's going on here? So we've got 2 mechs into 3 wind. So I would actually recommend, because traditionally what will end up happening is you're going to be M-stalled. I think it's much better, especially if the wind is this high, to go max, wind, wind. Because you want to get as much metal as possible so that you can pump out as many units as possible. Even though bots are less M heavy and more E heavy, it still makes a lot of sense for you to do that. You opt not to buy a transport. So your person here is talking about transports, or sorry, he says your air, and the other team was asking about transports, but you should always identify your air player who's going to be Jess 3D. And I pretty much always try to get a transport, because regardless if you're backline or frontline, it's always awesome to have a transport. On this map specifically, I think it's nice in your position because this mex isn't walkable by anything that's ground based. If you're on grid and you hit F6, you can see kind of like the red here, which means that you can't go up it. So this mex is going to be untapped until you can get an air, until you can either get an air con or a transport to fly a con over here. So getting an air trans on this map, I think, is nice when you're in this position, because first of all, you'll be able to tap this mex, but then second, you can also bring your commander to the front line. And Salt Reef is a little interesting because it's not completely symmetrical in how you think it is, because if you look at it, the fronts are offset, right? And so your side is the weak side and this side is the strong side, and the same is true up here. So what'll probably happen is this player will come up and he'll be able to get all these mexes, but if you're able to fly and get here first, and you can kind of set the front to where even if you don't hold these mexes, you can deny them, you're going to be in a much better position, because otherwise you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8. And he is going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? So you'll be equal there. But if you don't have the air con, and if you aren't able to take of these, like if you don't get this right, you'd have, say, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then he would have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And so there'd be an imbalance. So if you can get here and deny these mexes, I think it's super strong. The other thing that in air trans is nice is that if you need to like come up here and maybe build LLTs, you can do that as well. And if you want to build certain units, you can ferry them to the front. So in that case, I would say you definitely want to think about getting an air trans relatively early. Okay, so the wind is high and your E is strong enough, so you're going to drop a bot lab, which I like. We're going to go Resbot and then Grave Robber. So I don't disagree with this, right? You've got 5,600 energy here, and the map in total has quite a bit of E reclaim. So you want to get the Resbot out relatively early to start reclaiming stuff. I would probably actually go Con and then Resbot, because the 8 energy or 7 energy from the con is going to be super beneficial, just scaling early, right? 7 energy is basically a 10% boost in your energy economy right away. And it'll help you boost out other stuff so that your comm can be building all sorts of alternative things. And you're gonna oh, you're not boosting your lab. Okay, so your bot lab has 100 BP. Your commander has 300 BP, which means that you're going to build substantially faster if your commander is boosting your lab. Generally speaking, what happens early game is you'll e-stall when you try to boost, and in that time you start building other energy. So what I would recommend here is that instead of immediately running and building wind, use your commander and start boosting out this. Have your commander, if you just right click on the factory, he'll do it, or you can click guard and then click on the factory and he'll start boosting it. You'll start burning through energy, and as you get pretty low, you can drop either a solar or you can drop wind, and then that way you'll be able to get out units faster. The problem with the start you're doing here now is that anything you're building without additional build power on the lab is going to be extremely slow. And although you need energy here, you're not actually stalling that badly. So still spamming C. So like you still have a ton of energy. You want to just dump as much BP in as possible, because right now you have all this essentially excess energy. All right, so we get the Resbot out and he's going to go and reclaim. I like that. And you've got a con next. So this is why I would recommend doing it reverse. I think you have the right units, you just need to swap the order, right? Because if you had the con out, he could be boosting this lab so that units come out quicker, and you're not even e-stalling right now, right? And so your second unit could be the Resbot, and you can say, okay, go eat all this, go eat all this, go eat all this, right? But in the way you're doing it now, it's a little inefficient because you're kind of build power constrained, and your commander is leaving your lab. So this con is going to take quite a bit before it comes out. Looks like you're going to calm walk forward. Okay, yeah, so this guy is super slow in comparison. Building a converter. I understand your sort of sentiment or mindset behind, oh, let me build a converter here because I have a bunch of excess energy. I would say you really don't need to do that early, because it makes way more sense for you to keep pushing forward and start taking mexes, which are way more metal. But also, the faster you come forward, the faster you come to the front line, right? And so when you're building converters back here, you're just kind of delaying the speed at which you go to the front and the speed to which you get other mexes. So you're going to build that and then go forward, I'm assuming. Okay. So this is just another example, right? You built this converter. So this converter is using 70 energy a second, and you have 180 energy a second because you have this guy eating, right? And he's giving you, if you look in the bottom left, he's giving you plus 58 E. You have way more energy production than you need right now. And what you don't have is the build power to make units quicker, right? And so if you had the con there, you'd be able to start building stuff a little bit faster. And this con's gonna boost. Okay. So I would recommend not getting a con turret until you have like 4 cons and just using constructors to boost your lab instead. There's a couple of reasons for this. One is that con turrets take quite a bit of BP. They're like 5,300. They don't give you any energy, right? And when you're building it, your con can't be assisting anything else. So what I would recommend doing instead is having a mix where you're like, okay, 5 grunts, 1 con, 5 grunts, 1 con, 5 rockets, 1 con, or 3 rockets, 1 con, something like that, right? Or maybe like 3 grunts, 1 con, 3 grunts, 1 con. But by doing it this way, you're just sort of mismanaging your early build power, and that's reflected in your metal, right? And so we can look at other players on your team. Look at everyone else on your team. You have the most standing metal because you didn't utilize the build power of your commander and sort of allocate build power correctly, which means you're floating a lot of metal. If you were to look at someone else, for example, like let's look at blue. So blue has 2 cons out already, and he has the Lazarus, and he has a pawn out already, right? And his con turret is done, or is, you know, almost done, and he's going to be teching, so he actually wants the early con turret. You don't need the early con turret for this, but that's just an idea of like how much slower your start is just because you didn't fully utilize your commander's BP and get units out, right? He has a con and almost an entire con turret ahead of you just because his commander is boosting his lap. So see here, both of these are super, super slow. You also probably didn't need this grave robber if you aren't actually using all this energy, right? This thing's firing, but you don't necessarily need it. Okay, and we're gonna take this? We're taking this. Oh, you clicked back and then clicked forward. Okay. All right, and he is going to boost, which I think is the right call. Awesome, and your comm is walking. I would actually recommend before you keep going, because you haven't, well, so a couple things. First, I would recommend you get out at least out a couple grunts after your first con. I probably would have gone like con, resbot, grunt or something, because it's 3 minutes and your first grunt is coming out and your commander's already left your base. There are tons of players as you start to play with like more aggressive players who will have units like in your base there, right? Even like 1 tick is super difficult for you to deal with if you don't have multiple grunts, because the tick can kind of like hide behind your windmills and then your grunt will run up here and then he like runs like this and runs like this and he's able to do a bunch of damage. Whereas if you have multiple grunts, 1 grunt can go there, the other grunt can kind of go there and you can push him off. But as you start to play with more aggressive players, you can't get away with not having early combat units, right? You need to have a mix of like grunt, con, and then you transition into like rocket, con, rocket, res. In this situation, it's just super dangerous because you don't have any protection against scouts. The other thing I was going to say is you don't even know if scouts are coming, right? None of you guys have radar up here. So as your commander is walking, if you don't want to drop radar, say here, which might not be quite as useful, I would drop it further ahead. Ideally, you would kind of detour up and maybe drop it here, but I don't think the vision difference is really worth it. You could probably just drop it like here, and then you would know if there are raiders coming this way or if there are raiders kind of going that way, and then you'd better be able to react. But because we don't have radar, we just don't know. All right, commons walking, you're going to take this. There's multiple schools of thought on whether or not you actually want to take mexes as you go or just rush straight to front. In your specific situation, I think it's actually better if you get to front early because you don't even have the build power to utilize all of your metal. I think if you were kind of like a little bit more M-starved, it makes sense to get these mexes, but you can always just like, if you had more cons, you can always just send a con to come take these, and then the con would end up on the front eventually, and that's what you want, right? Because your commander can build LLTs and radar and thistles, but he can't build beamers or jammers or HLTs, and those are great things to have. So that's another sort of argument against the early con turret, is that if you had say 4 cons, you could have 1 spamming energy in the back, you could have 1 to 2 boosting, and then you could have 1 coming and taking these mexes and going. But you taking these mexes now is a little rough for me, because you're not really even using the metal. I mean, you definitely can use a lot more of it once this con turret is done, but I almost feel like coming front and setting the edge could be stronger. All right, and the grunts come out. Charging forward. All right, and now we're able to do a bit. Wind has dropped substantially. But you're still doing fine. Okay, and we see our opponent. So one of our opponents, either this one or this one, I mean, we know it's this guy, but you don't know in the game yet, right? Is Corebots. And he's coming here. His commander was here. So we need to get up there as soon as possible. And he's got some grunts. And we're going to keep spamming. So we still don't quite have the BP to utilize all of our stuff. All right, we're getting out another con, which I think is a great call. And we are coming to the front line. So if you didn't want to build the radar there, you could have built it like probably after this mech's here, because that would cover this entire gap on the left. So you'd know if anything was coming and you would know what units were here. Right now, there's probably stuff here, but your comms radar just doesn't detect it. Yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff there and we just don't know. And that's really scary because if there's a raid coming this way, you need to be able to bring your grunts. Or if there's a raid running this way, you need to be able to bring your grunts. Never be afraid to plop down like multiple radars because they're super cheap. They're 60 metal and 630E. That's like nothing, right? That's like a couple grunts. But vision and understanding of like the game state is super, super critical. All right, so we see something is there and our comm walks to front and grunts come into raid. Okay. So your commander isn't really doing anything here. He's coming now to like fight these, but he was idle for like 10 or 15 seconds here. Always try to get in the habit of just having like silly long queues, right? So like at the beginning, when your commander is here, you can be like, you know, you can be like, okay, so you're going to be here, come here and get this, come here and get this, drop a radar, and then come here and then LLT and then LLT and then LLT. But it's just nice because then like when this happens, you can bring all your grunts and fight these other grunts and you don't have to worry because your commander is doing stuff. But you're going to react down with your commander, and with the one grunt here, you need these grunts to come over, but they have more grunts than you do. So this is a little concerning. He's not going to commit. Okay. He's going to bring more grunts. Your commander's taking flanking damage, but it looks okay. Oh boy. You lose your comm here? So that's another reason. So I would also say you always want to have units with your comm. That's super scary. If you lose your comm early like that, your lane is almost just dead because he can just walk his comm up and eat it. And then he has such a massive eco advantage. And that's another reason why when you walk up, it's nice to just drop LLTs, because then the units that were attacking this way would have had to run through an LLT. If you had queued LLTs, you would have had at least one up, and then the units running would at least have gotten shot and taken some time before they got to your comm. All right, so we're on the front and you're going to reclaim. This is like really nitpicky, but I would not get the reclaim first. Your commander's super low and you don't know what else is going to attack. I would just drop the LLTs first because this reclaim is secure. You guys have the army here. You don't need to worry about eating it as soon as possible. And you're probably going to overflow it. You're not really building anything. In fact, we killed our queue. So let's talk about that in a second. But I would say build the LLTs, build radar, and then reclaim later. Back to your lab itself. So this sort of circles back to what I was saying before, which is you always want to have really long queues because you never know when a bunch of grunts are going to attack you, right? So if anything, you can just do, you know, you can go grunt, con, or whatever, and then just turn on repeat. Generally speaking, for a frontline fight like this, where it's relatively narrow and there isn't a lot of raiding potential, if you're bots, you want to be aggressive, but you know eventually you're going to run into an LLT forest and some combination of units, right? So knowing that, I would say once you get out around 10 grunts, you really just want to transition into rocket bots, right? And you can do like, say 4 rocket bots to 1 res bot or something like that, or 5 to 1, just sort of depending. But you want to have rocket bots so that you can be aggressive and kill LLTs. And then you want res bots so that you can resurrect stuff like this and repair and, you know, and maybe eat if you can't res it. But your lab is idle, and that's brutal because look at how much metal you're floating, right? If you think about if you were building this whole time, 1,300 metal, that's like 10 rocket bots, 11 rocket bots, right? Imagine what 11 rocket bots would do here if you had the BP, right? If you had built more cons and then built a nano later, and then you had, say, 10 more rocket bots or 11 more rocket bots here. You're really scary, but we just don't have the BP managed to actually do it. So this is, again, these guys are idle. Long queues. We're all about long queues. Everyone APM stalls. Your ally is APM stalling right now. It happens to the best of us. Don't worry. We're dropping LLTs. Nice. So your ally is making some interesting choices, but you can start to see the LLT forced, and that should be your cue to just spam rocket bots, not grunts. So grunts are an incredibly strong unit, but they aren't pushing units. They're raiding and skirmishing units. Grunts, you would need a massive blob of grunts to kill a commander and a bunch of LLTs. When you get to this situation, what you want to end up doing is having LLTs to kill stuff like grunts or thugs or tanks along with your commander, right? So like if there's brutes coming, or if there's stouts like medium tanks coming and you have LLTs, your LLTs can stop, and then if your commander's here, you can degun, and so there's an incentive for them not to push. Or if there's, say, artillery here, the artillery will be able to come up and shoot your LLTs. But if you have rocket bots, your rocket bots can come up, fire a volley, and then sort of back up. And the artillery can never really hit them because artillery can't hit moving units unless they pre-fire and guess where you're going to go. All right. So there's a raiding blitz. Your ally really wants you to know about it. Whenever you see yourself in this situation where you've got an incredible surplus of metal and you've got almost no energy, one of the best things you can do is build. Okay, so hold on. We're going to stop our previous train of thought. We're just going to address this really quickly. A general rule of thumb is somewhere between, for every 5 to 10 metal, you want 1 nano. It depends, because like some units, like air units, are more energy demanding than metal demanding. Vehicles are more metal than energy demanding. Bots are sort of in the middle. But at 16 energy income, you would want like 1 or 2 construction turrets boosting this with maybe a few more, maybe like with 1 con on it. You're about to build 8 construction turrets. And to put that into perspective, right? First of all, all of these are 200 metal apiece and 3,000 energy. So you're looking at 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. You're looking at your entire supply of metal in construction turrets. And once you've built them all, you're not going to have the metal or the energy to actually produce anything from them. So instead, you would want to build maybe just 1 more, or just have more cons, right? If you have more cons boosting, you're in a great situation. So you don't need to do that. Back to my original point. You aren't quite e-stalling, but you're about to e-stall. Whenever you get in the situation where even if wind is decent, if you have a ton of metal and no energy, you should just drop a couple solars, right? You can drop some solars because solars are 0 energy, but they're 150 metal. So you can drop the solars and you get 100% of the reclaim back for metal when you eat a building, but you get none of the energy. But solars are 0 energy, which means that they're the only building in the game that you get everything back from. Well, aside from walls, but they don't really count. So in this situation, I would say drop a solar as you start to like bottom out. All right, and we are building some more LLTs. I like this. And we got a con on the front who is building dragon's teeth. All right, I like that. You're kind of baiting them out. Maybe they think they're claws or something. and we're going to build our first radar. So I think there's a couple different things that you can do here. I think in this specific situation, I actually probably would have done a high ground nano like back here, and then I would have dropped a dragon's maw or multiple dragon's maws, right? These guys, you probably could have dropped like one there or maybe one there for a couple of reasons. One is dragon's maws, when they're down, have 75% damage reduction, which means they're incredibly hard to kill. And if you have a nano really far behind them, you can just heal even though you're getting chipped. And the guy in front of you has more units and more LLTs, so you kind of need to hold on until, you kind of need to hold on with pork. So I probably would have gone nano into some dragon's maws so that you can try to hold this, and I would just have my commander boost it. And then after, you can probably drop like a jammer. But I like dropping the teeth because you're sort of faking that that's what you're going to do. And okay, and we got some rocket bots coming now. At this point, I probably wouldn't have any grunts in queue. I think you want a queue of like, you want like a little standing army of like 5 to 10 grunts, and then you just want a bunch of rocket bots for a couple of reasons. Grunts aren't going to be useful into this at all, right? Like, for you to try to attack rocket bots, you're going to have to run into these LLTs, and the grunts are just going to get murdered. So you need rocket bots to fight into this. And then also, we just saw artillery fire from somewhere. Grunts, although great against a lot of things, if they can't get to this artillery because they have to run through these LLTs, they're not going to do anything, right? You need rocket bots to be able to come up here, skirmish with his, and pick off all of these LLTs. Because if you can start chipping at LLTs, you'll actually be able to push and accomplish more. All right, you have a wind farm in back. I like this. I actually don't like the double con on one. I prefer like wind here and then the other con building wind like that. It's not happening in this specific situation, but there's a lot of times where like they get in each other's way. The other reason why I like having it split is that it'll be in two different parts, so that if you get raided or if you get bombed, they might come and they might bomb this, but if you have another set of wind back here, that might survive. So it's nice to kind of diversify both the build power and the placement so that you're a little bit more protected. Okay, you're dropping all these nanos that we talked about, and we talked about the metal cost. The other thing to think about is that nanos are 3,200 energy, and you don't have anywhere near enough energy to power these, even if the wind is super high. Right now, you're burning 605 energy, and it's because some of your team is overflowing into you and you're eating into your surplus. But once you build all these, they can't actually do anything, right? So it's like at the beginning of the game, you had like a dearth of build power, right? You didn't have enough build power, but now you're overcompensating for your build power. And it's doubly scary because you're spending so much metal, right? Like this con turret and all of these con turrets are boosting con turrets in your base, not producing units. And you need units because your front is getting rolled by rocket bots. So in this situation, if you do want more con turrets, I would actually slave, like I'd probably take this nano and like a couple of nanos and make sure that they're on the lab, and you can just have the con and maybe one other nano help you build some more. But right now it's scary because you're putting all of your BP and metal into like economy you can't use, and your front is dying. All right, we're going to drop a warden. So wardens are good versus rocket bots and versus whistlers. Wardens are not good versus artillery. And we saw an arty shot earlier, right? So one Wolverine can kill any number of wardens because Wolverines have 710 range and wardens have 620. So the fact that you already saw 1 artillery means that you kind of don't want to go warden as much, because this thing can just kill it right away. And that's sort of the argument for why you want to go dragon's maws, because a warden has no damage reduction, right? But a dragon's maw, when it's lowered, only takes 25% damage. So the warden can get chipped apart by artillery pretty quickly, even if you're repairing it. But the dragon's maw, when it's down, is much, much harder to kill, especially if you're repairing it, right? Instead of the Wolverine doing, what's its damage? Its burst is 300, right? So instead of doing 300 damage, it's going to do 75 damage, and you can repair it. That's why I would say you want the dragon's maws first, and then you could drop the warden after. Okay, and so now we're E-stalling, and we're going to M-stall soon, but we don't really have the economy to support all the BP we have. You're sort of left out to dry by your ally who... So like this is a little rough because this part isn't really your fault, right? Like, this guy has rocket bots. He should be way more aggressive, but because he isn't aggressive, you're getting 1v2'd, which honestly sucks. With that said, I think you definitely could have played it and been in a better position for the 1v2, but you sort of have to like get more accustomed to that. Okay, and we're repairing the warden, but the artillery is here, and the artillery is starting to chip. But you're repairing, which is nice. Your con died, didn't it? Where is your con? Yeah, your con did die. Okay. This is another reason why I would have res bots in your build queue. Because if you have even just 2 res bots here, they can repair. Res bots have 200 BP, so they can repair, they can reclaim, they can do anything you need. So if you have a couple of them here, they can repair these, they could eat the dead ones here, but it's just nice to have them mixed in because you always want to be able to repair on the front line. That's just a critical part of frontline play. All right. You already have an E-storage, A+, highly recommended. I think you got it a little bit after 5 minutes, which is what I support. I think that's awesome, right? You want it for early comp play, you want it when the wind drops, etc. From like 6 to 8 minutes, the other thing that you really, really want is T2. And this guy said he was teching. He already has T2. You're a little M-starved now, but once you get to like 6 or 7 minutes, you want to look at your techer and you want to ask for T2, right? You need to say, hey, I really want T2, because the sooner you can get T2, the sooner you can start scaling. You're M-starved now, so these can't really even do anything. But like if you hadn't built these two, you would have the 420 metal for a con, right? A con is T2 bot con is 470, so you just be a little bit off. But if you just hadn't built those, you do it. So as a mental note, like 5 minutes, you want the E-storage A+, somewhere between like 7 and 8 or like 6 to 8, you want to get T2. So it's 7:30, you don't have T2, but you definitely want to get it ASAP. All right, we got a lot of grunts and we got some rocket bots and there was some artillery firing at you. So this is another argument for why you would want a con turret here, because if you had the con turret here, it could help repair. You could also probably have put a jammer, so it's not as big of a deal for the artillery. You don't have a jammer, so a good way to help fight artillery that's shooting at you from out of LOS is to actually take a grunt and just hit repeat and just move it from here to like here. Well, now there's an LLT, so like there to there or something. And then if this guy isn't microing his artillery, which he's running up and then running back, a lot of times the artillery will fire at the grunt as it runs, but the grunt will be too fast. So all the shells hit and then he runs back and then they fire again and all the shells hit and they just miss him. So sometimes you can bait artillery and stall for time just if you're patrolling with units or kind of dancing around. So this guy has some absolutely incredible LLT creep. This dude has a ton of LLTs and a ton of, well, he doesn't even have that many rocket bots. I think if you had committed to a lot of rocket bots, you totally would have been able to just like run over this dude. If you had LLTs and rocket bots, you could kill this guy. So Wolverines and Shell Shockers, the tier 1 artillery, they basically can't hit moving units. The only time they can hit moving units is if the units like run forward and then run back. And when they fired, they were firing here. And so the units go there and then get hit. Or if they pre-fire, like they see your army coming and then the guy guesses and he's like, oh, let me attack here, 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 you know, and then your army runs into it. But if you have rocket bots, for example, your rocket bots can just run up here and start shooting. And as soon as you see all the artillery fire, you just move from where you were and they're guaranteed to miss, basically. This dude has nothing to protect this artillery aside from brutes and incisors. So if you had a bunch of rocket bots, you could just come up here and just start killing these. Or like you have right now, you have a ton of grunts. You could just run these grunts in and kill all of these as well. But you're sort of on the back foot because you're trying to protect your warden. All right, let's look back at your base here. So we're still M-stalled. We still don't have T2 and we've swapped to thugs. Oh, and now we're back onto rocket bots. So thugs have a place in the game, but I wouldn't say the place of thugs in the game is on a flat fight versus vehicles. Generally speaking, on a front line like this, you want to go Rockos. The main time you want to go thug is when there's a terrain difference because thugs are plasma, right? They have plasma cannons. So you can abuse either LOS or you can abuse the plasma range. Here, I would just dedicate straight to rocket bots. You're overflowing, so you're going to drop some converters, which I can kind of get behind. You're going to get scouted, and the artillery is just going to start chipping away at you. So this was sort of my concern when I was like, oh, you already saw one artillery, you don't want to make more, or you don't want to make the warden. This is why, because artillery can just kill it and there's really nothing you can do unless you're going to commit into it. Okay, we see air coming. What's the plan? First, I would, notify your teammates, right? You could say bombers, you can say need AA, whatever. You can just type in, the frantic ping, ping, ping that a lot of people do, right? So that your air player knows, because your air player has bomb or has fighters, so he needs to react. A lot of times, well, you don't have a con here, but I would normally keep a con near all your construction turrets because you want to be able to utilize the BP. It's great if you can drop even just a couple of thistles because they will do a lot of work, especially versus T1 bombers. Versus T2 and liches and stuff, they don't really do that much, but versus T1, they're actually pretty useful. So bombers are coming. Your air player is not looking at the map. He's just chilling. He's chilling. That's fair. He wants to make some converters. You say help air. Nice, nice. And they scouted it and they're going to bomb. So all the BP that you had went down, unfortunately. Your air player is reacting now. Okay. We're going to lose a lot of our E, but that's life. Okay, and now I'm gonna say things are kind of a little bit beyond your control, right? We're 9 minutes in, but things are sort of in a bit of a disaster right now. I know this game goes for a lot longer, but I'm just gonna stop and summarize. I might watch a little bit more, but I think the main portion of what's gonna help you improve, we've already kind of touched on. So at the beginning, you didn't have enough BP and you didn't allocate your BP correctly. Then you overcompensated and you built more BP. So at the start, I would just recommend that you go max on a wind map like this, go max, max, wind, max, wind, wind, right? So it would literally be max, max, wind, max, and then you might need 2 wind, you might need 3 wind, just sort of depending. You might have to build a solar, but then you drop your lab and your commander needs to boost your lab so that you can get out units right away. And your first unit generally wants to be a constructor because you want additional build power to help build it. And because you're going to have E issues early on, you want a constructor because constructors give you 7 energy. Well, bot constructors give you 7 energy a second, right? And then before you move your commander out, try to burn as much of your starting metal as possible, right? If you're a little bit late to the front, but you've burned all of your starting metal, a lot of times that's okay. But I think when you started walking, you had like 600 metal in the bank. I would definitely try to maybe burn a little bit more before you go. Another sort of caveat to that is your air player asked about transports, and no one, I don't think anyone was like, oh, I want a transport. You definitely want a transport. Just get in the habit of always trying to give 1 wind or 2 wind to your air player and get a transport, because it's just going to give you a lot more fluidity on how to play. It's 9 minutes. This Max, he's unclaimed. He's just been sitting up here. He's very sad. He might even be crying. We don't know, right? He's not happy. You couldn't have taken this Mex at 0, but I bet you could have taken this Mex at, say, 2 minutes, right? And it's 9 minutes. So this Mex could have been producing for 7 minutes for you, right? You could have had like hundreds of additional metal that you don't have right now, but it's just sitting here and he's lonely and untapped. So get the transport, take this Mex, and then you can fly to the front line and start doing stuff. The next part is your unit composition really struggled. I think you overbuilt grunts when you didn't need to. I think that you need just like a small fighting force of, say, 5 to 10 grunts to stop raids, to punish artillery. But once you get to the front and you start building LLTs, you want to be able to kill the enemy's LLTs and the enemy's, say, artillery and tanks and other stuff. You just want to commit to rocket bots. Just go like 5 rocket bots to 1 grave robber on repeat, or 4 rocket bots to 1 grave robber on repeat. And you just want to have them coming to the front the whole time. And then you just want to be aggressive with them, right? You're going to select them and you're going to use a fight command and draw a line like that. So they walk forward and they shoot. And then you can just back them all up once they've shot their shot, right? So they come up, they shoot their rockets, you back them up, you can repair them, right? You can even like put repeat on your commander and you can do an area repair like this. And then your rocket bots can come up and attack and back up. And then if they take any damage, your commander goes, da, 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 and then he's like, repair, and everything's okay. And you can do the same with your res bots too, right? You can have your res bots on a repeat area repair so that you don't even have to think about repairing. All you have to do is micro your rocket bots and keep attacking. I'm not really going to go too much more into this replay because you just got bombed. And so you had a rough start and you got bombed. So what happens after is just what happens. You kind of have to play the game that you're given. But I think for me, the biggest improvements, like we talked about, were better management of BP, like a stronger start, but better management of BP. I would also split your energy and keep scaling energy like you did. Try to get a transport on a map like this where it's important to get to the front line and there are high cliffs, and then just your unit combination. Right? We want to try to have a better mix of units so that you can actually push the LLTs, because grunts don't really push LLTs. Thugs can, but against this many LLTs, you'll have to trade into them, whereas rocket bots outrange and you can just chip. If you do find yourself in a situation where you're like, oh, I might be losing ground and I don't have as many units, you want to try to stall. You want to switch into what's called kind of like cockroach gameplay. And a great way to do that is to build a nano before all the units are here, and then build Dragon's Maws, right? DM Dragon's Maws. You can build like 1 or 2. And the great thing about Maws is that they're super efficient. So Dragon's Maw is only 1550 energy, which is like insanely low. It's just like absolutely insane, right? I mean, it's like basically the cost is like that. It's like double the metal cost. But if you drop a couple of them down, and if you have a jammer, when the artillery or the rocket bots come up and shoot, they'll be doing only 25% damage. And then if you have a nano here, a construction turret, it can repair. And he can repair here, or your commander and your res bots can repair. But in general, you kind of don't want to get to that point. It's generally better if you can just fight against them instead with rocket bots. But if you do get in a situation where you're losing Dragon's Maws, A+ unit. Same with Dragon's Claws if you're ARM, right? Incredible units, just try to repair them when they're down because they can stall for a really long time. And then the last thing that I mentioned, but I'll just touch on again, around 5 minutes, you want E-Store, great point. Between like 7 to 8 or 6 to 8, you need to get T2. If you had T2 sooner, I think you would just have way more metal and you'd be able to just hopefully produce units and fight. Another reason why you would like a transport is that if you build a T2, if you buy a T2 from him, look at how long it's going to take. It's literally going to go like, right? It's going to like come through. It's going to be like, hey, what's up, Teal? It's going to come to Mattis and be like, what's up, my T1 combros, right? And it's going to come all the way here. It's going to come here. That's like a 2-minute walk. If you have a transport, your transport just goes, dut, dut, and it's like 15 seconds. So that's another reason why you want to transport. A lot of times your air players will just buy transports, but I don't think yours did, and he'll just fly the cons to you. But anyway, that's another reason why. So I'm not going to watch any further because I think you want to try to shore up your early game a bit more. If you have other questions, please let me know. And yeah, just post in the Discord thread. Have a good one and good luck in your future games.